cold winter months have you a bit depressed? Well, I have some spiritually uplifting news for you. Catholic Family News is going to be hosting a conference in sunny, warm Orlando, Florida, March 1st and 2nd. The theme of the conference is the global conflict between Christ's plan for peace and the devil's plan for disorder. We all sense that there is a great global conflict going on. This conference is an opportunity to step back from the details and look at the writings of an Irish priest from 100 years ago, Father Denis Fahey, who wrote about this global conflict and essentially predicted many of the things we're living through today. We have an excellent lineup of speakers, including both myself and Chris Ferrara from Church and State, as well as Father Michael McMahon, Father Matthew Panos, Mrs. Childs, Dr. Peter Kwasniewski, Mary Rundis, and Dr. John Rao. There will be a traditional Latin Mass offered publicly each day, so you won't even have to leave the hotel. For more information on the conference, please go to the website of Catholic Family News, where you can find a link to buy tickets. You can also use this QR code. Welcome back to another edition of Church and State during this really historic week. This is the week that the 47th president took Washington by storm. Let's just get your first reactions to the inauguration the first couple days.
It's a little short of a revolution.
Yeah.
And I don't use that word lightly because I'm very cynical about American politics. But I've said this before about Trump, and I'll say it again. I've been following politics my whole adult life, and this is the only president we've ever had that actually promises to bring about significant changes in the status quo and accomplishes them. And in the process, shows the establishment as the incompetent fools that they are. He's a deal maker, and he makes deals. He gets things done. He says, he said today, I'm very good at getting things done.
Well, he's been doing a lot. I mean, I think, to me, there's a real difference between 2016 and now. I mean, he hit the ground running. 200 executive actions the first day, and he hasn't really let up since, where I think 2016, he was being led around a bit by the people he hired. He is clearly in control.
Oh, he's learned the ropes.
Oh, and he's been working. I mean, he's had people working for months. You don't get this many things done that quickly, even from November. He's been working on this.
He systematically rooted out all the losers, time servers, and backstabbers.
Yeah.
There may still be some lurking in the woodwork, but today's event is particularly relevant to my bailiwick.
Yes.
Common Society submitted a list of 21 pro-lifers who have been prosecuted by the weaponized Biden Justice Department for nothing more than typical First Amendment protected activity, or at the worst, some minor civil disobedience in the form of trespassing. Prosecuted at the federal level, indicted and thrown into the gulag. He pardoned 21 people today.
Wow.
Everyone on the list that we submitted, keeping another one of his promises. And to anyone who said that it made no difference whether Trump or that cackling fool got elected, I hope you're ready to make a public apology, because you couldn't have been more catastrophically wrong. Can you imagine the horror that would have ensued if that buffoon had become president of the United States? These people would be rotting in jail, along with all the J6 people who did a walkabout inside the Capitol building between the velvet ropes and were treated worse than people who commit homicides. So,
well, not only would they be rotting in jail, they'd be getting new roommates. She is notorious when she was a prosecutor in California for going after people who pray outside of abortion clinics. So they would have gotten more crowded in the jail.
Oh, it would have been a nightmare, an unending nightmare. So this is a miraculous deliverance. I can't imagine that there wasn't some role for divine providence in this. The only reason we're seeing any of this happening is that at the precise right instant, he turned his head to the right so the bullet didn't go into his skull.
Yes.
I mean, any traditionalist Catholic who is prone to look for signs of divine providence, which is a good thing, it's good to trust in providence, who doesn't see that here is just being obtuse.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody's prayers and sacrifices, not this fellow, because my prayers aren't worth a whole lot. Somebody's prayers and sacrifices have delivered us yet again from the pit that we were inching toward we're going to get another 4-year reprieve unless they assassinate him.
Mm.
And I expect that that's going to be attempted again, too. But we've had a miraculous several days of executive actions, not only the pardons of the J6 people, the 21 pro-lifers unjustly prosecuted and in prison. He withdrew us from WHO. He withdrew us from the Paris Accords. And on the libertarian front, I think this is a good thing. He's opened the way to deregulation of Bitcoin, which is a currency the government can't control. That would open up the economy to all kinds of activity. Now, some of it's going to be illegal, but that's just the way the economy is in a post-Christian society. We can't do anything about that. But also it operates for the good in terms of taking currency out of the hands of government control so that they can't turn off your money if they don't like you.
Mm. Which they've been doing, which they have been doing.
It's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, he's signed a slew of executive orders affirming, this is another gigantic one, affirming that there are only two genders, male and female, which tells us, by the way, that we're in a pre-apocalyptic scenario where the president of the United States has to sign an executive order saying there's only male and female.
I mean, he has to give you a third grade biology lesson. That's how bad we are. But I mean, actually, it's fine. I want to stop on that one because I've seen a lot of people like making fun of it. Oh, it's just symbolic. What's the big deal? This is actually going to have real consequences beyond just this symbolism. I mean, it's directing all the agencies to basically go after funding, federal funding for anybody that doesn't do this. So he actually did a 1-2 punch at the liberal educational system. One is through this, because they receive federal funding, grants fund almost every research university. They're going to have to knock off this, 27,000 genders on their application. Followed up today with the Department of Education saying any school from secondary through college that has DEI programs is going to lose your federal funding. I mean, that's going to have an incredible impact.
He's on a mission. He is going to end all of the nonsense. This is going to be the presidency of common sense. Are we going to be 100% in agreement on everything he does?
No.
It's a binary system. We only have two choices. But this was obviously the only choice available to us. And he's vindicating that choice with these executive actions. Some of these actions are truly revolutionary. He's also promised, by the way, I can't believe I heard this, to get rid of the Department of Education.
Yeah.
He wants to disband it.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, if you study the history of revolutions, what the moderns call liberty, you'll know that one of their first goals is to establish secular public education. Because that is where you have your seminary of conformity to the zeitgeist. You turn out little drones that parrot the truisms of liberty. And among these, of course, is separation of church and state, unlimited freedom of expression, so that you can say there are 27 genders and have boys playing on girls' sports teams, killing babies in the womb, legalizing sodomy, and so forth, ad infinitum, every imaginable evil. This begins with the public education system. And I'm finishing up the second volume of my book on liberty, and I'm noticing developments in Mexico at the turn of the century. One of the first things they did, after conquering conservative forces, when there was the Constitution of 1857 in Mexico and the War of Reform, after conquering the conservative forces in a decisive battle, what song did they sing? What do you suppose they sang in this city? I can't pronounce the name of the city. They sang the Marseillaise in Mexico. And then they established a public educational system devoid of religious instruction. And then when the Constitution of 1917 came along in Mexico, that educational system had to be also socialistic. This is around the time that Russia was spreading its errors throughout the world in 1917. So, that's a huge thing. If they could actually abolish the Department of Education, that might be the single most important thing Trump could accomplish, if you could get the federal government out of the business of education.
And you're right; those trends, the early 20th century, we were not immune from them here. Those shortly after 1917 in the 20s was the huge push for public education, mandatory public education, John Dewey, liberalization of the whole system, was going on here at the same time that more revolutionary in Mexico.
And the American liberal prelates, the
Yes,
Americanists, led by
yes,
John Ireland, were pushing public
yes,
education, and Ireland's ridiculous Faribault plan, where you would have
yes.
a little bit of religious instruction in the public school, but you would eliminate the Catholic schools.
Hmm.
Lunatic. He's a lunatic. He
Yes.
was a lunatic. No wonder they called him the Antichrist of the North. And that's the other thing you see. You see developing around the turn of the century, and I guess we'll be segueing into the church momentarily. You see the beginning of the invasion of the church by this whole idea of liberty. But what
Mm.
is liberty? The essence of liberty is essentially not Catholic.
Yes.
That's it. So society will no longer be Catholic. Government will no longer have any relationships with the church. Morals and customs will no longer be Catholic. Institutions will no longer be Catholic. That is the goal of the revolution from its beginning, with the time of Martin Luther, who I call patient zero in this whole civilizational disease. It's all about getting rid of the influence of the Catholic Church over the body politic. And, if we get rid of the Department of Education and do a few other things, then Catholic schools will come back, and they will no longer be driven out of existence by the publicly subsidized secular competition in the public education system.
Mm. Well, mentioning the church, we've been talking a little bit of his executive actions. I want to focus a little bit on the inauguration itself, because, they turned it into a sort of mini Assisi. They had a whole bunch of ecumenical prayers going on.
Right.
But it was fascinating as I was watching it, because I was sitting there watching it with my wife and one of my sons, and the buffoon, Cardinal Dolan, comes up. And before he even opens his mouth, I said, he's not going to mention our Lord Jesus Christ once.
Nope.
Watch. And my
Nope.
son's like, oh, come on, Dad. He's got to. I'm like, nope, not even obliquely. And he quotes George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. It was basically a political speech. It wasn't even a prayer. Not a word of our Lord Jesus Christ. Later in the event, this priest from Brooklyn gets up. Once again, no mention of our Lord Jesus Christ. Every Protestant preacher, layperson who's pretending to be a priest, invokes the name of Lord Jesus Christ, including the black guy who was hilarious. I mean,
He was ranting and raving. But Franklin
but
Graham,
but he sounded more Catholic than Cardinal Dolan.
yeah, he did, and so did Franklin Graham.
Yeah,
All they did was mention Christ.
exactly.
I hate to tout my own book, but it is pertinent. I talk about a movement of Protestant evangelicals in the mid to late 1800s who were promoting the kingship of Christ and sought an amendment to the preamble of the Constitution, stating that the revealed will of Christ is the law of the land. It could have been written by Leo XIII or Pius XI. But now we have Catholic prelates who are less militant in that regard than Protestant preachers. We saw that at the inauguration. And of course, we have this whole, panoply of religions. Everyone worships his or her God. That's the American way. And, obviously that's not what we think is the ideal situation. But as Pope Leo said, this is the situation in which we find ourselves. And in that situation, what we have with Trump is the closest thing to a political miracle we can hope for.
Yes. Well, as we transition, one of the major things he's done is get the country back, because you don't have a country if you're under invasion. A lot of measures to secure the southern border sent. I've seen a couple different numbers, several thousand U.S. troops to the border. Today, the ICE has announced, I think, 1,300 deportations already. And he's interesting. I mean, we try to have a whole show on it, his move on birth citizenship, kind of an interesting legal issue, but a whole flurry of activity to try to reestablish the semblance of a country again. Meanwhile, the U.S. prelates are already ramping up their criticism, falling in line with the dictator Pope's rhetoric, and saying we have to defend our flock. If they come after our flock, we have to protect them. Again, interestingly, if they were deporting them back to communist China or Cuba, I maybe agree with them. Hey, these guys. But if they're deporting them to another Catholic country, they're not your flock. They belong to the Catholic Church, right? This is all just
Excellent point. And funny thing is, these people came marching in with their national flags, Nicaragua, El Salvador, proud of their national heritage, with their cell phone service still connected to the networks back home, and they use the cell phones to send remittances back there.
Right.
So they come in here illegally, make money as illegal aliens, and that's what they are, illegal aliens.
Yeah.
Think of all the people who waited 8 years to get a green card, what they think of this travesty. And they take that money and send it by cell phone back to the home country, whose flag they carried into this country while claiming they needed political asylum.
Right.
Well, it's a mockery.
You mentioned that. You mentioned that about illegal aliens. By the way, I don't know if you saw Governor DeSantis today at a press conference. He just tore down this reporter. The reporter said, "I want to ask you a question about undocumented immigrants," and he just shut him in. I said, "You can't ask the question that way. Under the law of the United States, they are illegal aliens." He said, "An undocumented person is like if I get in my car and forget my driver's license. I'm undocumented." He said, "It's an illegal alien." And the reporter said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'll rephrase my question."
Yeah, they're going to go back to using the term alien, which is in the statute.
Exactly.
And Francis, of course, being the Budinsky that he is, he's constantly meddling in political affairs, it demonstrated the ultimate in hypocrisy. He pronounced Trump's border initiatives a disgrace. At the same time, listen to this. So, the Catholic World Report reports on Vatican cracks down on illegal entry into its territory. And listen to what the Vatican has just done. This is January 15th. In a decree issued last month by the Holy See, the monetary sanctions and prison sentences for those who violate the strict security regulations of Vatican City have been considerably increased. The document signed by Cardinal Fernando Veraguas Alzaga, president of the Pontifical Commission for the Vatican City-State, provides for monetary fines ranging from 10,000 to 25,000 euros and prison sentences ranging from 1 to 4 years. And it goes on to say, these fines will apply especially to those who enter by means of, get this, deception, bypassing border controls or security systems. So if you bypass the border control or security system of the Pope's little enclave over there, you can go to prison for up to 4 years. And yet he tells us that Trump's attempt to secure the border of the United States against an invasion by tens of millions of people is disgraceful. But this is just typical, isn't it, Brian, of the hypocrisy of limousine liberals, among whom we now number the current occupant of the chair of Peter.
Oh, they're all do as I say, not as I do. Pay no attention to what I'm doing because
the jet-setting carbon emitter who cares more about the carbon emissions of other people than his own carbon emissions, or apparently the salvation of souls, which last time I heard is supposed to be the mission of the Roman pontiff.
Yeah, exactly.
But not any longer, because now the church is basically a demonstration project for precisely what the moderns call liberty.
So these new, very compassionate, merciful rules, I guess, were they adopted by Sister Raffaella Petrini, the new woman he's now got running the Vatican?
I don't know who adopted them, but they were promulgated by that commission for the city-state. And that's some of the harshest immigration laws in Europe. They will not tolerate in the Vatican city-state the presence of a single solitary illegal alien.
But we're supposed to have like 20 million. That's fine.
Yeah, that's the level of hypocrisy we're dealing with. And this Pope knows nothing about this issue. He thinks these people are refugees from persecution, when actually they're coming in to take money from Americans who would otherwise have those jobs and send it back via cell phone to their relatives back home in the countries that they're very proud of, in which they're not suffering any persecution whatsoever, but they were given asylum and a total abuse of the immigration system. That's okay with this Pope because he knows nothing about it. That's why.
Right. Well, I mean, he's been a walking contradiction since the beginning. Right? He's the Pope of Mercy who brutally suppresses and cancels and removes bishops, and anyone who criticizes him, he shows no mercy. Right? He's the Pope of No Mercy who preaches mercy all the time.
The man who denounces rigidity in his fellow Catholics, and I'm being generous when I say fellow Catholics, by the way. The man who denounces rigidity is the most rigid, intolerant,
Yeah.
stubborn ideologue ever to occupy the chair of Peter. He doesn't even perceive just how rigid and unbending and inflexible and intolerant he is of anyone who disagrees with him. It's just he's a walking example of liberal hypocrisy. What else can you say?
Well, exactly. Well, as we kind of wrap up, I'd like to get your opinion today. Apparently, over in Davos, where all the globalist elites meet, the president of Argentina, Mr. Milei, went and gave a speech, and I'll paraphrase, but he essentially said, the jig is up. You guys are finished. There is a coalition sweeping around the world, and he mentioned from Hungary to Argentina, Donald Trump in the United States, and several other countries. He said the world is done with you. It is moving away from your agenda. I mean, do you think we may have really reached a turning point in this kind of global battle between the globalists and everybody else who's just trying to survive?
It would appear so. The forces arrayed against Trump and anybody who challenges the New World Order are far from done. We'll see what maneuvers they try. They still have the levers of power. They could still provoke some sort of international crisis, including a world war over this ridiculous situation in Ukraine. And Trump is right to call it a ridiculous war. But things seem to be trending our way. And, the Lord of history could well be involved here. We're not beyond redemption, even now. And it could be, as I said earlier, that the prayers and sacrifices, for all we know, could be the prayers and sacrifices of a few nuns in a convent somewhere that tipped the balance.
Maybe in Arlington, Texas, who was the nuns who were being persecuted by Francis himself. Maybe that's where it was.
Yeah. Well, I think things are looking up on all fronts, contrary to what we expected. And what Trump has done here, I think, counts as the greatest comeback in the history of democratic politics. I don't think anything even approaches what he was able to do in terms of coming back from adversity. It seems as if this is all somehow divinely ordained. Not that he's anything like Charlemagne the Great, but for America, that's the best we can do. And God seems to be affording us the opportunity to have elected for another 4 years the best that this system can offer.
Well, before we go, we have a minute. I want to get your thoughts on one thing. As Biden went out the door, they put a pen in his hand, and he signed a whole bunch of pardons, not including his whole family, essentially. But one that's really interesting, he signed one for Dr. Anthony Fauci, going back to 2014. Now, it's for anything he may have done back to 2014. Now, it's interesting that date because 2014 is the year the United States government made it a crime to conduct gain-of-function research. It could be a coincidence, but
no, it's not.
Interestingly, today, the Putin has spoken out about the negotiations over the trying to end ceasefire and end the Ukraine war, and there are some reports that one of his demands as part of that negotiation is to have Anthony Fauci turned over to face crimes for spreading the pandemic, which is something I could see appealing if it turns out to be true. Again, the reports that I could see Trump jumping right on, like, "Oh, Biden, you pardon him in the U.S.? Fine, we'll send him over there."
Well, I tell you what, we had the makings of a slam dunk perjury case based on his testimony before Congress about gain-of-function research. No question he was dissembling at best. Yeah. So an ambitious prosecutor could have made a case. And that's why he was pardoned. And, of course, the whole Biden crime family was pardoned. Now we know that there was a Biden crime family.
Right.
He pardoned his own brothers and their wives and didn't pardon himself significantly. So these pardons are confirmation that everything the so-called conspiracy theorists of the right were saying about crimes and misdemeanors committed by the Biden crime family turned out to be true. You don't pardon someone who's done nothing. And if they accept the pardon, there's a Supreme Court case which escapes me, the title of the case, which says that upon acceptance of a pardon, there arises an imputation of guilt.
Oh, interesting.
Because the pardon would be pointless if there was nothing that from which you are absolved criminally. So you have to accept the pardon. If you were to reject the pardon, then it wouldn't be effective. But when you accept it, there's an imputation of guilt. An innocent person doesn't accept a pardon. An innocent person says, I've done nothing wrong. I mean, obviously, practically speaking, you would accept it to get out from under the criminal process. But the Supreme Court decision stands for the proposition that upon acceptance of a pardon, an imputation of guilt arises. You were guilty of something, now you're pardoned. So the Biden crime family has incurred an imputation of guilt, as if we didn't know.
Right. But sometimes it's nice to have things confirmed, right?
Yes.
Sometimes it's nice.
Yes.
So, well, there you have it in this tumultuous week. We have Donald Trump really taking over the government like I think no president has done since maybe Andrew Jackson. And Pope Francis fuming in the Vatican, keeping out any pesky Italians or tourists who might invade his inner sanctum. There there you have the state of the world.
You can't make it up.
You can't
make it up. It's a comedy.
It is a comedy.
But it's a tragic comedy. And we can only hope that the day will come when we have a conclave and a pope who actually does Catholicism, ascends to the chair of Peter once again, and brings about the restoration, not just piecemeal as we see it today, but throughout the church.
Well, and make Catholicism Catholic again.
Yes.
Right, there we are. Great. Well, I have congratulations on your the pro-lifers getting the pardons, and we'll see what's the first 2 weeks have been when we meet again in 2 weeks.
Until the next time, God bless.